You can't even do your job, you salary thief. Quit today.
After throwing tea on me, Emily saw my flustered reaction and sneered loudly. Unfortunately, it was the end of lunch break, and no one was near the break room to witness this. Seeing my condition, Emily laughed heartily, clapping her hands. Satisfied, she turned her back on me and left to return to work. After quitting my job, I had been living a modest life, but one day, my son Mike told me he wanted to introduce me to his fiancée. I was nervously excited about such a happy occasion, but when I saw the face of the fiancée that Mike had brought, I froze in shock. She, too, froze and began to tremble gradually. While giving her a cold look, I said just one thing. "Please, come in. There's a lot I'd like to talk about." She remained frozen, but at Mike's urging, she reluctantly entered the house. "My name is Victoria. I am a 65-year-old part-time office worker. I've been with this company for a long time. After raising children and working for many years, I've seen the company change in various ways. It started as a small company with just a few of us, including myself, but it has grown significantly over the years, expanding both in size and staff numbers. The number of female employees, which was once only a handful, has also grown substantially. I am proud of these changes. However, as time passes, it means the company's internal dynamics change as well. As I got older, I gradually began to feel left behind. Now, a new breeze is blowing through the workplace. We've hired new employees through mid-career recruitment. With the addition of these new employees, I was appointed as the trainer. I'm training again after a long while, and I'm coordinating with my boss, Tom, as we prepare for the day. The new employee, Emily, is 27 years old and has experience in office work from her previous job, so we're expecting her to be a great asset right away. On Emily's first day, I met her. Emily, who appeared, was beautiful and stylish, just like the young women of today.
Nice to meet you. I'm Emily. I look forward to working with you starting today.
She greeted everyone energetically, radiating the freshness typical of a new employee. After the initial greetings, she quickly got started with her tasks. As I showed her around the department and explained various things, Emily just nodded along without taking any notes. "Do you understand everything?" I asked, occasionally looking back at her with some concern.
Yes, I get it.
But her response seemed disinterested. "Well, she'll probably learn her way around as she works here." After finishing the tour, I returned to my desk. Then, as I began to explain her duties in detail, Emily started recording a video on her smartphone. "What are you doing?"
I'm recording so I can watch it later. Listening to explanations can be such a hassle, you know?
I urged her to continue paying attention. Despite being in a company where sensitive information that shouldn't leave the premises is commonplace, Emily casually mentioned recording it, which made me very concerned. I immediately made her stop filming. "Please take notes instead." Emily made a face, clearly annoyed. After convincing her several times and finally getting her to understand, I ended the day unusually exhausted. The next day, Emily was bold. She wasn't exactly late, but arrived just in time to start work and began doing her makeup at her desk.
Hey, I can hear you, so feel free to keep talking.
When she noticed my astonished look, she said that, and when I corrected her, she looked displeased, so I had to explain until she accepted it. Over the next few days, I found myself repeating the same instructions multiple times. This was no way to work, and I was getting anxious because I couldn't justify such behavior from a new hire like Emily to my superiors. Then, a few days passed, and it was about half a month since she had joined the company. Even when it was time to start work, Emily hadn't arrived at the company. As I wondered what was going on and started to feel anxious, Tom pointed out that Emily hadn't shown up yet. I apologized and tried calling Emily, but couldn't get through. Just as I was starting to panic, Emily casually arrived and sat at her desk, without a greeting or apology, and began doing her makeup just like before. I was speechless. Noticing Tom looking at me quizzically, I hurried to ask Emily about the situation. However, all I got back was a lazy, uninterested response, which made me even more flustered. Were you feeling unwell? Don't hesitate to let us know in those situations. And as I listed all the precautions she should consider, Emily, incredibly, clicked her tongue in irritation.
So annoying. Isn't an apology enough?
Then she stood up briskly and went over to Tom, apologizing in a sweet, coaxing tone. Tom seemed not entirely displeased and smiled, encouraging her to get back to work. I sighed in disbelief. When Emily returned to her desk, I decided to firmly reiterate the need for proper behavior to prevent this from happening again.
What's wrong with you? So persistent. Haven't I already apologized?
Emily glared at me while sulking. Just as I was about to reprimand Emily again, seeing no sign of remorse from her, Tom called out to me. Reluctantly, I went over to him.
Seems like she's reflected on it. Let it be.
Perhaps because I was out of view from Tom's seat, he hadn't seen Emily's behavior. I nodded reluctantly, without being able to argue, and returned to my desk. Then I found tissues, cotton swabs, and other items carelessly left on my desk. All of them were clearly trash used by Emily, marked with eyeliner and lipstick. I looked over at Emily, but she wasn't looking back at me. After I threw away the trash from my desk, I could hear snickering from the next seat over. When I looked again, Emily was sticking out her tongue and laughing. And from that day, childish harassment began. It was really tough from there on out. Every day brought small acts of harassment and minor mistakes at work, on top of Tom's demands for better training of the new employee. Emily first ingratiated herself with Tom, our boss, claiming that her mistakes were due to my inadequate instruction. Tom then told me to provide more thorough guidance and cut her some slack. Thanks to this, I was left with a headache every day and was on the verge of a breakdown. Then one day, after such ongoing issues, Tom summoned me. Wondering what it was about, I went to another room, where I found Tom with a red face. Cautiously inquiring about the situation, I learned that Emily had sent important documents intended for a client to the completely wrong company. Emily was responsible for the mailing process, and it seems she was quickly questioned about it. She claimed that I had checked the recipient, which of course I had no memory of doing, or even knew she had handled the mailing. Lately, I had been juggling my own work, struggling with training Emily, and also covering the task she was supposed to handle, which left me completely swamped every day. I don't remember confirming any such thing. I told Tom clearly.
This is a lack of supervision on your part, since you are the trainer?
Instead of Emily, I was the one sent to apologize to the wrong company. When I returned from making the apologies, Emily turned to me with a smirk.
For all the tough talk, you can't really do it, can you? That's not good for someone in charge of training.
Irritated by her sneering smile, I impulsively slapped the desk and stood up.
Don't take your frustrations out.
However, Tom reprimanded me, and I sat down dejectedly. Unaware of the actual situation, other colleagues started looking at me coldly, and I felt isolated. From then on, Emily continued to make minor mistakes and blame them all on me. The others noticed but did not point it out, and seeing this, Emily mocked me. I couldn't stand her arrogant behavior anymore, so one day, at the end of lunch break, I called Emily to a secluded spot. It was just the two of us in the break room, as lunch break was ending. Emily seemed to not even see me, just waiting for the water to boil. Emily, your recent attitude is too much. As a professional, you need to behave properly. I decided to let out all the frustrations I had been holding back, since no one else was around. Since the incident with the misdirected documents, Emily's behavior had worsened. Unexcused lateness became the norm. It was becoming more frequent for her to do nothing all day and then leave. Tom is to blame for allowing this, but I think Emily taking advantage of it is also wrong. If you don't like being corrected by me, you should change your behavior to avoid it. What do you think you should do from now on? As the water boiled, Emily began pouring the hot water into her own bottle to make tea, and then she started to speak.
I am doing my job. I mean, I manage to leave on time every day, right? Doesn't that mean I'm efficient?
That's because I end up finishing the work you leave behind.
But if you're the trainer, cleaning up after me should be easy, right? Or what? Are you setting me up to work overtime because of me? That's terrible.
Her words made me snap. Despite me reducing her daily workload so she could manage it on her own. What an awful thing to say. What do you even come here for every day? You arrive late, sit at your desk doing your makeup, then once that's done, you chat with other employees. You eat lunch, chat some more, handle a little bit of menial work, then chat again. And you think it's okay to leave on time after a day like that?
That's mean to call it chatting. We're talking about work. You act like you're working too, even though you never teach me anything.
You say I never teach you anything. Despite my repeated instructions, Emily has failed to follow through, but I have continued to teach her with perseverance. Despite that, her claiming I haven't taught her anything baffles me. I couldn't stay silent and retorted. Enough already. Please don't use me as an excuse for your inability to work." As I was about to grab her, something splashed across my face. It was the tea Emily had just made. The incident was so sudden that I didn't immediately feel the heat, and I was momentarily stunned. Gradually, a piercing pain spread across my face, and that's when I finally felt the heat. I cried out in pain, searching for something to wipe my face with. During this, I could hear Emily's laughter.
You can't even do your job, you salary thief. Quit today.
After throwing tea on me, Emily saw my flustered reaction and sneered loudly. Unfortunately, it was the end of lunch break, and no one was near the break room to witness this. Seeing my condition, Emily laughed heartily, clapping her hands. Satisfied, she turned her back on me and left to return to work. As she walked away, I regretted using the object thrown at me to wipe my face. It turned out to be a rag typically used for wiping wet floors. That day, with my face red from the heat, I insisted to Tom that I was feeling unwell and left early, ignoring his attempts to stop me. The next day, I threw my resignation letter into the mailbox, stating my intention to resign and use up my remaining paid leave. About a month later, my son, Mike, said,
"I want to introduce you to someone I'm considering marrying."
By then, the burns on my face had settled down, leaving only a few spots, so I happily agreed to meet them. On the day Mike was bringing his fiancée over, I dressed up a bit and waited excitedly. I wonder what kind of person it will be. As I waited eagerly, the doorbell rang. I felt a rush of happiness and practically danced to the door to greet them. "Oh my, you're early. Please, come in."
Nice to meet you. I'm Emily. I look forward to working with you today.
As soon as I opened the door, a familiar figure appeared. I was startled and cut myself off, but she enthusiastically continued her greeting. As our eyes met, her words gradually trailed off. While Emily stood there, eyes wide in shock, Mike, somewhat puzzled, urged her to come inside. However, Emily was frozen in place, her face pale. Quickly recovering, I forced a smile and welcomed her. "Welcome, I'm glad you could make it. Please, come in. There's a lot I'd like to talk about." I headed to the kitchen. "I need to boil some water and make some hot tea." I could hear Mike calling to Emily a few times in the entrance. Finally, when they both came up, I called out from the kitchen, "Make yourselves comfortable." Mike seemed to settle down on the living room sofa, but Emily sat next to him, her head bowed and hands tightly clasped. "That's understandable. Who would have thought that the mother of the person you decided to marry was once your tormentor at work?" I waited for the water to boil and poured it into the teapot, then carried cups for everyone into the living room. As I placed them in front of them in the living room, she let out a small scream. Mike looked at her worriedly as she reacted strangely. I first set down the teacup a bit forcefully right in front of Emily. Emily let out another small scream and squirmed uncomfortably. After placing teacups in front of Mike and myself, I laughed awkwardly and said, "I'm sorry, I was so happy Mike brought his fiancée that I boiled the water too much. It's very hot, so be careful not to spill it." Seeing Mike react to the hot cup, I pretended to panic and added, "See, I told you to be careful. It would be awful if you ended up with scars like mine." Glancing at Emily, I noticed her gripping her hands even tighter after my comment. "Mike, it seems Emily is nervous, so why don't you start the conversation? Where and when did you two meet?" I decided to press on with the story of how they met, gradually cornering Emily. "Oh my, you've been together for 6 months. I had no idea." As I listened to Mike's somewhat embarrassed story, I occasionally glanced at Emily. Throughout Mike's narrative, Emily kept her head down and did not look up. Even when Mike tried to involve her in the conversation, she only nodded or shook her head in denial without speaking. Seeing her silence, I feigned interest and finally spoke to her. "Emily, was it? What are you doing for work these days?" Despite my question, Emily didn't answer, prompting Mike to speak up worriedly. Still, with no response from her, I threw in what you might call a helping hand with a bit of provocation. "You must be nervous because it's your first time meeting me. Or are you perhaps scared of me?" Seeing Emily clench her hands tighter at my words, Mike, slightly annoyed, answered her occupation on her behalf. "Oh, you're an office worker? I was an office worker myself until just last month, but I've quit since then." I said this slowly, almost instructively, while keeping my gaze fixed on Emily. Emily did not look at me. Instead, she stiffened, not moving an inch. Seeing her discomfort, Mike tried to change the subject by talking about her workplace, but of course, I already knew about it. "Oh, you work there too. I used to work at the same place. What department are you in? We might have crossed paths somewhere, like in the break room, perhaps." At this, Emily visibly shuddered and shrunk even more. Mike started to genuinely worry about Emily as her behavior was so strange, but I continued talking regardless. "I quit last month. Right before I left, a new person joined, and she was incredibly free-spirited. I was her trainer, and despite my best efforts every day, it felt totally unrewarded. Just when I thought it was getting out of hand and decided to give her a form guidance, she threw hot tea in my face. That was the last straw for me, so I quit." The younger generation can be really frightening, can't they? At this, Mike became outraged. Because I had told him I quit my job, but not the reason why.
We should go to the police and complain to the company.
Learning that his mother had been injured, Mike finally said this. Hearing this, Emily looked up for the first time that day. She probably couldn't bear hearing the word police. But acknowledging this would reveal to Mike that she was the one who had injured me. So Emily didn't say a word. Despite everything, it seemed she hadn't given up on marrying Mike, which left me beyond dismayed. However, my admiration for her persistence didn't mean I would allow their marriage. I added as a final blow. I still remember the pain from that time. You do too, don't you, Emily? I stared intently at Emily. While I watched, Emily, avoiding eye contact, wiped away her sweat. Mike, unable to grasp the situation, looked back and forth between Emily and me, his frown deepening. Since that time, you couldn't do a single thing at work, but after I left, you suddenly became capable. Mike mentioned earlier that you are the most competent female employee, but have you stopped making mistakes with the document deliveries? Emily's face turned pale, and she began to tremble visibly. Mike probably decided to just observe the interaction between Emily and me, remaining silent without interjecting. Do you really intend to marry Mike after doing such things? Do you think I would allow it? I pressed her, and Emily stood up abruptly. Then, glaring at me, she began to speak, as if unleashing a flood of words.
I never thought you'd be his mother. You don't look anything like him. How could I have known? And what's with all the snide remarks? Are you threatening me? If that's your game, I can play too. I'll sue you for blackmail.
After she finished speaking and was panting heavily, I stood up, casting a cool glance at Emily. Of course, I was holding a teacup in my hand. Seeing this, Emily seemed to realize what might happen next, and her expression stiffened. As I raised my arm holding the hot teacup, Emily instinctively covered her face with her arms. I then tilted the still hot teacup and drained it in one gulp. Hot tea is no problem to drink. I prefer mighty hot. Despite bracing herself, Emily was surprised that nothing happened and slowly lowered her arms to look at me cautiously. Don't compare yourself to me. I don't have a hobby of hurting people just because I don't like them. Then I went to the kitchen to put away the teacup. As Emily stood frozen, I threw out one last remark. You're not suitable for Mike. You should leave immediately. At that, Emily fled like she was escaping. Left behind, Mike watched me as I watched the dishes. After hearing the whole situation from me, Mike naturally broke off his engagement with Emily. During that time, he reported everything to Emily's parents, who came to apologize, but I didn't even look at them. Instead of reporting to the police, I declared that they would pay for damages and cover all past and future medical expenses. This led to Emily being disowned by her biological parents and kicked out of her home. Of course, the company was informed, and the CEO himself came to my place to leave the compensation. The company subtly asked me not to disclose this incident, but I didn't want to spread the word about the scars on my face either, so I agreed. Mike still seemed unsatisfied, but I was touched that he got angry on my behalf, and I reassured him not to worry about it. Sometime later, Mike brought a woman home. He said she was the woman he would spend his life with, and the woman I met for the first time was gentle and very kind. After talking with her a bit, I took a liking to her, and I was relieved that Mike finally had a bright future ahead of him. Now, it seemed we would both have happy days to look forward to.